One by one we scrambled from the gully, bent low, boots slipping in the mud, every step feeling like it might be the last. You never forget the man who saves your life. Not really. You might forget details. What day of the week it was, whether the rain came down hard or just drizzled, whether the sky was blue or gray. But you never forget him. His face, his voice, his name. His name was Corporal Michael Hayes. But to us, he was just Hayes. A wiry kid from Tennessee with dark eyes that seemed older than his 22 years. He wasn't the loudest or the fastest or the strongest, but he was steady. Steadier than the rest of us. When the chaos of war cracked our nerves, Hayes was the one you wanted next to you. I was a sergeant then, 24 years old, convinced I knew everything about life and soldiering. The truth? I didn't know a damn thing. The war, this one was in Italy, 1944, was teaching me lesson by lesson. And Hayes, he was the kind of teacher you don't ask for but never forget. We were part of a rifle platoon, 30 men tasked with pushing through the Apennines. High ridges, thick forests, villages clinging to the slopes like barnacles. It was cold, always cold, even in April. Mud clung to our boots, weighed us down, sucked the strength out of us. And then there was the enemy. German paratroopers dug in and waiting. The kind of men who made every step forward feel like stealing from death itself. One morning before the sun had burned the mist off the valley, we got the order. Seize the ridge ahead. Intelligence said it was lightly defended. Hayes muttered something under his breath when he heard that. Something about how lightly defended always meant we're walking into hell. He wasn't wrong. We moved out in staggered columns, rifles tight to our shoulders, helmets heavy on our heads. The ridge loomed above, a dark silhouette through the haze. Birds startled at our approach, flapping noisily from the trees. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like a funeral march. Halfway up, the first machine gun opened up. The rattle tore through the mist and men dropped around me. The ridge wasn't lightly defended. It was a fortress. Nest after nest of MG-42s stitched fire into our line, pinning us down in the mud. We hugged the earth, ears ringing, the air filled with splintering bark and screaming men. "Sergeant, we can't stay here," Hayes shouted, crawling up beside me. His face was streaked with dirt, his eyes sharp, clear, determined. "We'll be slaughtered in the open." I knew he was right, but I also knew moving meant exposing ourselves. Orders were screaming in my head. Take the ridge, hold the ridge. But orders don't stop bullets. I hesitated. That half-second of doubt could have killed us all. Hayes didn't hesitate. He pointed toward a dry gully that cut across the slope, maybe 30 yards ahead. Cover. A chance. We moved there. Now. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos. I nodded, gave the signal. We moved in bursts, men dragging each other, some falling and never rising again. Hayes was everywhere, pulling Private Jenkins by the collar when he froze, shoving Corporal Miller into cover just as a burst of fire chewed up the dirt where his head had been. He was the glue holding us together. By the time we reached the gully, half the platoon was down. The survivors were wide-eyed, trembling, staring at me for direction. But it wasn't me they were really looking at. It was Hayes. He crouched in the mud, his rifle cradled, breathing steady, already scanning for the next move. That was Hayes, the soldier who never cracked, the one who saw the path when the rest of us only saw death. And none of us knew then what he already seemed to understand. This ridge, this mission would be the one that wrote his name into our bones forever. We crouched low in that gully, our chests heaving, helmets slick with sweat and mud. The machine guns above still hammered away, but at least the earth shielded us from the worst of it. The ground shook with every burst, dirt sprinkling down from the gully walls. I looked at the men, faces pale, eyes wide, knuckles white on their rifles. Some whispered prayers, others stared blankly at nothing, trapped in their own terror. They needed a plan. They needed a leader. And though the stripes on my sleeve said that leader was me, it was Hayes who spoke first. "Those guns will chew us apart if we try to climb straight up," he said calmly, pointing with the muzzle of his rifle toward a rocky outcropping on the left. "But that slope's steeper. Less cover for them, less fire on us. If we move now, we've got a chance." The men nodded, as if his word carried more weight than the captain's orders. And in that moment it did. I gave the signal. One by one, we scrambled from the gully, bent low, boots slipping in the mud, every step feeling like it might be the last. Rounds snapped past us, hot needles in the air, but somehow we kept moving. The slope burned our legs, our lungs screamed, but Hayes was ahead, his lean frame cutting through the climb like he was born for it. Halfway up, an explosion split the world. Mortar. The blast threw me sideways, my ears ringing, vision spinning. Dirt rained down, mixed with something darker. I blinked, dazed, and saw Hendricks lying twisted, his chest unmoving. I froze. My mind blanked. That's when Hayes grabbed my arm, yanking me forward with surprising strength. "Move, Sarge! You stop, we all die!" His voice cut through the fog, sharper than the blast itself. We pushed higher. The ridge loomed above, the machine guns spitting fire, but their arcs couldn't cover the angle of our climb. When we finally threw ourselves flat on the crest, gasping, we were behind them. The gunners never saw us coming. What happened next was chaos, brutal and fast. Rifles cracked, grenades thumped, shouts in German split the air. We cleared the nests one by one, close and violent, every man running on pure adrenaline. By the time the smoke cleared, the ridge was ours. We should have been relieved. We should have cheered. But when I looked around, I saw only empty places where friends had been. Of the 30 men we started with, fewer than 20 stood now. And Hayes was still moving among them, steady as ever, checking weapons, passing canteens, clapping shoulders, holding us together. When the captain arrived with the rest of the company, he praised me. "Good work, Sergeant." Textbook flanking maneuver. He had no idea it hadn't been my call. It had been Hayes, the quiet corporal from Tennessee. That night, as we dug shallow foxholes in the cold earth, I watched him sit apart for a moment, staring at the stars that barely pierced the Italian haze. He looked older than 22, older than any of us, like he carried the whole ridge on his shoulders. I didn't know then that this would be the beginning of the end for him, that the ridge we'd taken so hard would only lead us deeper into hell, that the man who saved us would not walk back down. But I knew one thing as I lay there, rifle across my chest, ears still ringing from the fight. Without Hayes, none of us would be alive to see another dawn. And dawn was coming, along with the next order, along with the next sacrifice. The morning after the ridge felt wrong. The air was too still, too heavy. We sat in our shallow foxholes, helmets tipped forward, trying to steal moments of rest. Smoke drifted up from the valley below, carrying with it the sharp tang of burned powder and something worse. Something you never forget once you've smelled it. The captain gathered us quickly. His face was pale under the grime, his voice tight. "The Germans are regrouping. High Command wants this ridge held at all costs. Reinforcements are on the way, but until then we dig in and fight. Hold at all costs." We all knew what that meant. None of us said it out loud, but the weight of it pressed down on us as surely as the dirt on our helmets. Hayes just nodded. His jaw set and went back to helping O'Reilly fortify a position with sandbags we'd stripped from enemy emplacements. By midday, the counterattack came. At first it was just probing fire, rifle cracks echoing from the tree line. Then the artillery started. Shells screamed in overhead, bursting among the rocks, shaking the ridge like an earthquake. We huddled down, the ground shivering under our bellies, waiting for the infantry to follow. They came like shadows, gray uniforms slipping through the smoke, rifles barking. We opened fire. Rifles clattered, machine guns roared. The air filled with shouts, screams, and the constant metallic shriek of ricochets. I shouted until my throat was raw, trying to keep the men firing, keep the line from breaking. It was chaos, pure chaos. And through it all, Hayes moved like he was born in battle. Calm, deliberate, fearless. He darted from position to position, hauling ammo, dragging the wounded back, firing bursts that always seemed to come at the exact moment we needed them. At one point, I saw a German squad pushing through a gap on our flank. If they broke through, they'd roll us up from the side. Before I could even call it out, Hayes was there. He charged straight into their fire, sliding into cover, tossing a grenade that blew the whole squad back in a roar of dirt and screams. He came back with his sleeve torn, blood soaking through, but he didn't say a word, just grabbed more ammo and kept going. The fight raged for hours. By the time the sun dipped low, our line held, but barely. We were down to half our ammo. Water was scarce. The wounded groaned in shallow holes wrapped in bandages that were already soaked through. Reinforcements still hadn't arrived. That night the ridge felt haunted. We sat in silence, ears ringing, eyes staring into the dark. Hayes came over to where I sat, rifle across my knees. He lowered himself beside me, his face drawn, shadows under his eyes. "You think we'll make it through?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. He just looked out over the valley, the moonlight painting the trees in silver. Finally he said, "Doesn't matter if we do, Sarge. What matters is the boys down there in the valley. If we hold, they live. That's enough." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that his life mattered just as much. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something unshakable, a quiet certainty. He already knew what he was willing to give. And in that moment, a chill ran down my spine, because I realized Hayes was already carrying the burden of a man who didn't expect to walk away. The night dragged on like an eternity. Every creak of the trees, every snap of a twig made us flinch, rifles twitching toward the darkness. The wounded moaned quietly, some calling out for mothers, wives, names we didn't recognize. Doc did what he could with torn bandages and morphine syrettes, but he looked more exhausted than any of us. We took turns on watch, though none of us really slept. Hayes stayed awake the longest, moving silently from foxhole to foxhole, checking on the boys, whispering a word of encouragement here, handing over a canteen there. He was bleeding through his sleeve, but he never once tended to it. Around midnight, the fog rolled in, thick, low, crawling fog that swallowed the world whole. The ridge became a ghostly island, cut off from everything. You couldn't see more than a few feet. The silence was broken only by the distant thump of artillery, muffled by the mist. It was like the earth itself was holding its breath. That's when the Germans came again. The first sound was a rustle, boots on wet grass, then the click of metal. Then the fog lit up with muzzle flashes, close, too close. Shouts in German, grenades tumbling into the gloom. We fired back blindly, muzzle flashes lighting up pale faces in the mist. It was chaos, intimate and brutal, men colliding in the fog, bayonets flashing silver. I'll never forget the sound of it. Not the gunfire, not the explosions, but the breathing. Heavy, panicked, right in your ear as you grappled with someone you couldn't even see. I was nearly overrun. Two figures burst out of the fog at me. I dropped one with a wild burst from my rifle, but the other slammed into me, knocking me into the mud. His bayonet gleamed as he drove it down, only for Hayes to come barreling out of the mist, tackling him clean off me. They rolled, snarling, clawing in the dirt until Hayes drove his knife home. He pulled me up, mud streaking his face. "Stay alive, Sarge," he said through clenched teeth. "That's the only order that matters now." We fought like demons until the fog began to lift, until the Germans melted back into the trees. The ground was slick with blood and rain, the ridge littered with bodies, ours and theirs. Of the 20 men we'd had left, maybe 15 were still standing. When the sun finally rose, pale and cold, it revealed a ridge that looked less like a battlefield and more like a graveyard. And in that gray light I saw Hayes, standing on the edge, staring out toward the valley. His shoulders were squared, his rifle resting against his leg, but there was something in his eyes that chilled me. A quiet acceptance. Reinforcements hadn't come. We were still alone. And deep down, I think Hayes knew the price that would be paid before the day was done. By midday, the ridge felt like the center of the universe. And that universe was nothing but fire and steel. The Germans weren't giving up. Their artillery found the range, and every shell felt closer, hotter, crueler. Each impact lifted men off their feet. Shredded sandbags left ringing silence in our ears. The radio was nearly useless, the antenna bent, static, drowning out most transmissions. When we did get through, the voice on the other end was grim. Reinforcements delayed. Hold position, hold, always hold. But holding meant bleeding. Every hour another man went down. Some we carried back to Doc, who worked with hands shaking from exhaustion, muttering prayers as he wrapped wounds. Others, we could only cover with a poncho and move past. I caught Hayes more than once staring at those ponchos longer than the rest of us did, not with fear, with a kind of calculation like he was measuring something inside himself. By late afternoon, the Germans tried again. A coordinated push. 3 squads coming up the slope, grenades bouncing among the rocks, machine gun bursts stitching dirt inches from our faces. We poured fire into them, Rifles snapping, bars rattling, grenades thumping from our own hands. The air filled with smoke and screams, men clawing up the ridge only to be hurled back down. At one point, a machine gun pinned us so hard we couldn't even lift our heads. It had a perfect angle cutting across our line. Men ducked low, pressed into the mud, helpless. Then Hayes crawled forward, his body flat against the ground, inch by inch through mud and shrapnel. He pulled a grenade from his belt, yanked the pin with his teeth, and lobbed it in one smooth motion. The blast silenced the gun, sent bodies tumbling. Hayes slid back into our line, chest heaving, mud streaked with blood on his cheek. He grinned for half a second, then coughed hard, his sleeve blooming red again. I grabbed him. "You need Doc. Now." He shook his head. "Doc's got bigger problems. I'm fine." He wasn't, but we didn't argue. Not with men still alive because of what he'd done. As the sun dipped low again, our numbers thinned. We started with 30. Now maybe 12 of us held that battered ridge. The ground we sat on was chewed to pieces, sandbags ripped open, rifles running hot. And still, no reinforcements. That night, under another blanket of fog, the captain finally admitted what we all knew. He crawled to my foxhole, mud caked into every wrinkle on his face. His voice was hoarse. "They'll break us by morning," he said. "We need someone to get through. Someone to find another company, anyone, and bring them here." My gut sank. It was a death sentence. Anyone leaving this ridge would have to cross open ground crawling with Germans. I opened my mouth, but Hayes was already there. He had appeared like a shadow, crouched beside us. "I'll go," he said. Quiet, steady, like he was volunteering for a work detail, not a suicide mission. "No," I snapped. "Absolutely not. You've done enough. He cut me off with a look. Calm, firm, unshakable. "You've got to hold them together, Sarge. That's your job. This one's mine." The captain didn't argue, neither did I, because deep down we both knew he was right. Hayes squeezed my shoulder once. "Keep 'em breathing, Sarge." Then he was gone, slipping into the night, swallowed by fog and shadow. And that was the last time I saw him. The hours after Hayes left were the hardest of my life. We sat in silence, every man staring into the fog as if willing him to reappear. Every gunshot in the distance made us flinch. Was it him? Was he down? Had he made it through? We didn't know. And not knowing was worse than any shell or bullet. By dawn, the fog thinned, revealing a ridge that looked like the edge of the world. Craters pocked the earth, bodies lay twisted in grotesque positions, rifles scattered like broken sticks. Our 12 had become 10. Doc was down to his last morphine. Ammunition was running out. Then the counterattack came. They came in waves, gray uniforms moving through the smoke, shouting, firing, hurling grenades. We fired until our rifles were too hot to touch, until our magazines ran dry. I remember grabbing a fallen German's weapon, firing until that too clicked empty. The men looked at me with hollow eyes. "Sarge, this is it," one whispered, and for the first time I believed him. Then the sound came. At first distant, like thunder rolling through the valley, then louder, sharper, unmistakable. The chopping roar of engines, American engines, reinforcements. A company from another regiment scrambling up the slope, shouting, firing, pushing the Germans back. The tide turned in minutes. Where we had been clinging by our fingernails, suddenly there was strength, numbers, momentum. The ridge was ours again. The relief was overwhelming, but it lasted only seconds before reality hit me like a hammer. Where was Hayes? I searched every face in that fresh wave of soldiers. Young, dirty, shouting, alive, but not his. I ran from one to the next, grabbing arms, demanding answers. "Did you see a corporal? Tennessee boy, scar on his chin? Hayes, his name's Hayes." One lieutenant finally stopped me. His face was grim. "We got your message, Sergeant. A runner found us, made it through German lines, bleeding bad, but he delivered the coordinates. Collapsed right after. Didn't make it." I couldn't breathe. The ridge, the reinforcements, our survival. It was all because Hayes had done what none of us could. He'd run through hell itself, carrying the weight of all of us on his shoulders. And he hadn't come back. The lieutenant clapped my shoulder. "Hell of a soldier, saved a lot of lives today." I nodded, but the words were knives. Hayes wasn't just a soldier, he was my friend, the man who had steadied us when the ground crumbled, the one who had seen the end coming and walked into it, willingly, so we wouldn't have to. That night, after the ridge was secure and the captain wrote his neat little report about a successful defense, I sat alone. The stars were sharp and cold above, the air biting at my lungs. I thought of Hayes lying somewhere in the valley, unseen, unburied, just another body in a war that chewed up good men and spat them out. I whispered his name, over and over, like if I said it enough it would anchor him here, keep him from slipping into the endless dark. But names don't bring men back. The ridge was ours, but victory felt like ashes in my mouth. The men cheered weakly when the reinforcements dug in beside us, but their eyes betrayed the truth. We were alive, yes, but only because Hayes wasn't. We buried our dead that evening in shallow graves hacked into the frozen earth. The chaplain muttered prayers with a voice cracked from cold and grief. I stood apart, staring down into the valley. Somewhere out there, Hayes lay still, his blood cooling in the mud. We didn't even have his body to lay to rest. War is cruel, but sometimes it's cruel in silence. Hayes didn't die in the blaze of a charge or the roar of artillery. He died running through fog, unseen, unheard, alone. And yet because of him, we stood breathing on that ridge. That paradox burned in me. When the reinforcement captain asked me for details, I told him the truth, that we'd been cut off, surrounded, that Hayes had volunteered, that he made it through. The captain nodded and scribbled notes, already looking past me, already thinking of the next fight. To him, Hayes was a line in a report. To me, he was the reason my heart still beat. That night, the cold was sharper than ever. My men huddled close for warmth, their breaths fogging in the dim starlight. I lay awake, turning the memory of Hayes over and over in my mind. His scarred chin, his quiet drawl, the way he carried weight without complaint, and his last look at me before stepping into the fog. Calm, certain, resolved. I whispered, "You saved us, brother." But the fog gave no reply. Weeks later, after we'd been rotated off the line, a bundle of reports came through. Commendations, medals, citations. Hayes was listed among the missing. No grave, no marker, just missing in action. My stomach turned at the words. They erased him with bureaucracy. I couldn't let that stand. I gathered the men, those of us who'd survived the ridge. We sat in the dim light of a makeshift hut. The smell of damp wool and tobacco thick in the air. "We remember him," I said, my voice tight. "Not the way the reports say. Not as missing. He's the reason we're breathing. We owe him more than silence." One by one, they nodded. Jackson clutching his battered PRC-25 radio. Doc rubbing his calloused hands together. Young Riley, who hadn't spoken much since the ridge, whispered, "He's why I got to go home someday." So we made a pact. Hayes would live in our words, in our stories. We would carry him wherever we went. He would never be missing to us. He would always be present. In the laughter around a campfire, in the hush of prayer, in the silence after a firefight when we counted the living and the dead. Years later, when I sat in my quiet kitchen with the world at peace outside my window, I kept that pact. I told my children about him, not in bloody detail, but enough. "There was a man once," I'd say. "His name was Hayes. He gave more than any of us." My kids didn't fully understand, but they listened. And in that listening, Hayes's name lived on. The ridge is long behind me now, but sometimes, especially in winter, I dream of fog. I see him stepping into it again, shoulders squared, head high, rifle slung, walking away from us so that we could live. I always try to follow, but the fog swallows him before I can catch up. And then I wake, heart pounding, tears on my face. And I know what the army never wrote down, that the soldier who never came home saved us all. Decades have passed since that ridge. The war ended. The world moved on. New wars began and ended. New generations grew up with no memory of the fog, the cold, the endless fear. But for me, and for the men who walked off that ridge alive, Hayes never left. Every year when the calendar turned to winter, I found myself drifting back. Some winters I'd write his name on the first page of a new journal. Other winters I'd walk alone in the early morning frost, whispering his name to the empty streets. It was my way of keeping him close, of refusing to let silence bury him deeper than the mud already had. When I reunited with my old squad years later at a reunion, the first thing we talked about wasn't medals or victories. It was Hayes. Jackson, the old radio man, told us he still heard Hayes's voice when he keyed the radio in his dreams. Doc said he prayed to Hayes more than to saints, asking for strength when his own life grew heavy. Even Riley, who had been just a kid back then, admitted he built his family on the idea of sacrifice because Hayes had shown him what it meant to give everything for others. We laughed, we cried, and we told his story again, because that was the pact. The Army could call him missing, but to us he was eternal. Sometimes people ask me if I believe in heroes. I don't give them the answer they expect. Medals tarnish. Stories get exaggerated. But heroes are men like Hayes, men whose names don't always appear in textbooks, men who slip into the fog without hesitation, carrying the weight of everyone else's survival on their shoulders. Heroes aren't the ones who come home draped in glory. They're the ones who never come home at all, but who live on in every breath of the men they saved. Now as I sit here, old, tired, and surrounded by the comforts of a life Hayes never got, I feel both guilty and grateful. Guilty because I survived when he did not. Grateful because his sacrifice gave me the years to love, to raise children, to see grandchildren's faces light up at Christmas. I am the sum of his choice. We all are. So I tell his story, over and over to anyone who will listen. Not for me, not for glory, but for him, for Hayes. Because the promise we made was simple. We will not forget. And if you're listening now, if these words reach you, then you're part of that promise too. Carry his name with you. Let it echo beyond this story. Remember that freedom, life, survival, they are never free. Someone always pays the cost. And sometimes that cost is one man stepping into the fog never to return. If Hayes were here, he wouldn't want statues or speeches. He'd just want us to live well, to be decent to one another, to value the gift he gave us. So let's honor him in the only way that matters, by remembering and by living. And if this story moved you, if you want to hear more untold voices like his, make sure you subscribe. Share this story. Leave a comment with your thoughts or simply his name, Hayes, because every time his name is spoken, he comes home for a moment. The war ended. The ridge is quiet. The fog lifted long ago, but in memory and promise and story, Hayes never left. He's still out there, watching, protecting, reminding us all what it truly means to give everything. And that's why the soldier who never came home saved us all.